General Motors held its Investor Day this past Wednesday, and woo girl, it was a lot. Our very own Kate Walden-Elliott told me that Investor Days are where big corporations say the quiet parts out loud, and there was definitely a fair bit of that, but also some pretty interesting news when it comes to cleaner, greener, safer and smarter transportation. So today I'm going to tell you what we think are the important takeaways so you don't have to sit through hours of presentations. First up is 000, a slogan that we heard repeatedly throughout the day. It stands for zero crashes, zero emissions and zero congestion, and positions electric vehicles and vehicle autonomy at the forefront of the company messaging. It smacks of marketing more than actual corporate philosophy, and companies who've used this term in the past have, more often than not, failed to meet the slogan's lofty goals. One of the absolute biggest takeaways from the entire event has to be that General Motors wants to be seen as a, quote, platform innovator rather than as an automaker. Again, this isn't new. It's the kind of new hotness for automakers these days as they struggle to play catch up to Tesla and transition to being more than companies that make things with wheels. The word platform here is wearing a bunch of different hats, as we'll see, referring to software platforms as well as the Ultium electric vehicle platform on which GM is possibly pinning its future, to name only two. Speaking of Ultium, GM is certainly putting a lot of eggs in the Ultium basket, saying it plans to be #1 in EV market share in the USA. That's a lofty goal, but I'll be honest, the way GM executives talked during the event about the competition didn't fill me with confidence. Virtually every mention of competing companies' electric offerings spoke of the advantages General Motors' Ultium platform has against other firms' quote, retrofit vehicles. And yeah, of course it does. But then Tesla, Nissan, Ford, Rivian, Lucid Motors and Volkswagen Group all have ground-up EVs on sale in the US right now, with Hyundai and Kia's first purpose-built EVs coming in a few months. I can think of 13 non-retrofit EVs I can buy today in the United States, or could if I had the money, without breaking a sweat. And there are at least 3 more that will be here within 6 months without taking General Motors' upcoming offerings into consideration. And General Motors has a lot to say about those upcoming offerings. Obviously, there's the Cadillac Lyriq SUV, which was featured on stage throughout the presentation. Then there's the Hummer EV, which GM really wants us to know has crab walk since they showed the feature over and over again in footage. We've also already been told there's going to be an electric Silverado coming, along with the Cadillac Celestiq, Chevy Equinox, Chevy Blazer, and a quote, even lower cost car which we weren't given any information on. Now, I'm not an expert in corporate branding, but maybe if you're an automaker dealing with a $2 billion recall campaign for EV batteries catching fire, you might want to set the Blazer nameplate aside. And speaking of the Bolt & Bolt EV, the cars that always got rolled out to prove how green GM was before, you know, well, they were nowhere to be seen. Like that one cousin you aren't allowed to talk about at a family get-together. GM is wholly focusing its EV ambitions on its Ultium vehicles, which conveniently lets it forget about the still ongoing debacle of its current generation of electric cars. But that's just the start of GM's stated electric ambitions, with speakers often referencing GM's quote, all-electric future. By 2030, General Motors is aiming to have 50% of its manufacturing capacity in the US and China capable of producing electric vehicles. And when a company adds capable to a forward-looking statement, you know it's because the company is hedging its bets as to if it will actually do the thing it's talking about. Those plants, and in fact all of GM's plants by the way, will be running off 100% renewable energy by 2025, a date by which GM says it will have launched 30 global electric vehicles. With GM no longer really actively involved in Europe, and far fewer subsidiary brands than it once had outside North America, this will likely translate to a large number of new electric models for the Chinese market, produced in collaboration with local automakers, perhaps a few new other models in Asian markets like Korea, and the rest in North and South America. All those EVs will need a lot of batteries and motors, so GM went over its plans for the same. It has partnerships with Wolfspeed and General Electric to source materials needed for various EV components, and is working on supply agreements with various companies for lithium, cobalt and other raw materials needed to build batteries. GM plans to bring its battery production in-house as part of its work to reduce battery costs, and GM's VP of Electric and Autonomous Vehicles, Ken Morris, stated the Ultium battery is already 40% cheaper than the battery system used for the Bolt. It wasn't clear if that was on a cell level or pack level though. In that vein, it's constructing an all-new battery development center at its Global Technical Center in Warren, Michigan, with a focus on new materials and new technologies to increase energy density and cell size, with an ambitious goal of 600 to 1200 watt-hours per liter in future designs. Something that might cause concern though? GM President Mark Rees made it quite clear that the company isn't distancing itself from troubled battery supplier LG Energy. This isn't a surprise given how inextricably the brand is tying its future as an automaker to the success of the Ultium battery system, which it co-developed and co-produces with LG Energy. Outside of battery electric vehicles, GM reiterated its commitment to further development and utilization of its Hydrotech hydrogen fuel cell stack as a second zero tailpipe emission technology. GM seems to envision BEVs taking on the transportation roles currently filled by gasoline-petrol vehicles, with the Hydrotech system taking on the role of diesel and possibly Jet A1. But don't despair, petrolheads. General Motors also wants to be agonizingly clear that most of its internal combustion engine vehicles aren't going anywhere. There's no timeline on that off-sided all-electric future, and we heard over and over again that GM will continue to build and sell ICE, with next-generation internal combustion crossover production ramping up over the next few years, and no substantial changes in its ICE truck offerings, though the company did say there will be a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from its trucks by 2030. So, yay. This shouldn't be a surprise. While CEO Mary Barra did at least utter the words climate change during her presentation, combustion trucks are big money for General Motors, just as they are for every other company that makes them. There was a lot of talk about ICE trucks in particular helping fund GM's electric transition, but it does feel that as long as GM and some of its rivals can turn a buck on exhaust spewers, they're going to do it indefinitely. When questioned about phasing out planned internal combustion vehicles if EV demand is higher than expected, we were told that some GM brands may have that flexibility, but it was implied that others do not. And on the theme of making a buck, it's time to turn our attention to perhaps the most significant element of Investor Day, discussion of GM's Ultifi system. Ultifi, not to be confused with Ultium, underpins GM's entire plan for, quote, converting vehicles into platforms for software, and sees a future in which, to paraphrase GM's Director of Autonomous Vehicle Integration Scott Miller, vehicles that have been enabled by software can now be defined by it. At the heart of Ultifi is a Linux-based computer system that ties in every sensor and system in a vehicle, and connects it all not only together within that vehicle, but also to the cloud. That may sound simple, but it opens up massive revenue opportunities for GM, and could redefine what car ownership looks like for you and me. It also, of course, opens up avenues of attack, so computer security is going to have to be a really profound area of focus. And for the record, I'm not saying that anything General Motors is talking about with Ultifi is super groundbreaking. Hell, at one point Miller excitedly described the potential for what amounts to a clone of Tesla's Sentry mode as if it was a new idea. But that's the norm for investor days, where companies are trying to focus on having a, quote, competitive advantage to keep investors sweet. That said, it's worth diving into what GM is envisioning for the technology, which representatives repeatedly talked about in terms of likening cars to smartphones. Just as making phone calls is no longer the primary job of a smartphone, GM envisions cars for whom carrying passengers from place to place is no longer the primary job, or at least isn't the primary revenue driver for the company which made it. Keeping with that analogy, GM intends to open up its Ultifi API to independent app developers, and some of the things the representative described sounded kinda nifty, I suppose. A weather app that automatically closes your windows if it knows rain is coming, or a facial recognition system that sees the child in the rear seat and automatically engages the child locks. There's also a mention of app developers creating personalization themes, which put me in mind of Winamp in the 90s, but hey, that was fun, I guess. But with all vehicle sensors and controls to be available as services for developers to work with, from there things get a little dystopian on two axes, data and onboard features. On the data front, millions of connected cars on the road gives GM a massive data set to play with and to sell, which GM definitely sees as a revenue opportunity. I know that because they said it over and over again. Using rain sensor data to add weather conditions to onboard navigation seems harmless enough, but there was also talk of collecting geotagged information on seatbelt use and potholes that would be given or sold to authorities. With continuous cloud connectivity, onboard cameras, Lyric has 18 of them, can presumably be accessed at any time for any vehicle. We've seen where that's gone with Ring cameras and police departments already, and given that GM talked quite excitedly about its defense contracting work, well, things could get ugly. Not to mention the way that CCTV and facial recognition are weaponized in China, where GM is deeply invested. When it comes to onboard features and Ultifi, we of course get to subscriptions and premium feature purchases. Senior VP for Innovation and Growth Alan Wexler reiterated that ongoing subscription services are GM's bedrock for recurring revenue. The company already brings in significant money through existing subscriptions, but research has shown customers willing to spend $135 a month on digital products and services. And that GM is excited by the prospect of making you buy lower tier services before getting to the more useful features. Consumers are already familiar with automotive subscription services for data connectivity, enhanced radio, car Wi-Fi hotspots, and navigation, but GM envisions going far beyond that. We were told that customers will be able to buy additional features for GM Super Cruise, the company's level 2 hands-free driving assistance system. And there was also mention of premium or subscription charges for acceleration, something Tesla currently offers with its $2,000 acceleration boost update. With the overarching emphasis on how total Ultify's access to a car's system is, the sky's the limit for what aspects of vehicle ownership General Motors could make subscription-based. To extrapolate from what we heard, it's very possible that all while you're paying GM to accelerate faster than a vintage Volkswagen, or to use your backup camera, or whatever else it might choose, the company's also selling every scrap of data about how you drive, where you drive, and what your car saw along the way to the highest bidder. This is, unsurprisingly, the same as we've seen before from other automakers. In fact, we made a video about it a few years ago after CES, and it scares us, even though both Nikki and Kate are hardcore nerds who have no problem downloading some open source code and having a tinker. But there's something vastly different between having smart gadgets in your life that you own and can control the data of, versus an all-seeing, all-knowing tech controlled by big corporations. The idea of charging for extras as a revenue stream does explain how the company's proposed production of a $30,000 Chevy Equinox EV with 300 miles of range is financially feasible for it. It might seem far-fetched at first glance, but if the company plans for significant ongoing revenue through data brokering and customers purchasing subscription services, it just might make financial sense. The whole idea is rather like Sony selling a PS5 essentially at cost, knowing that you're going to have to buy games for it and that's where the money will be. I'm picking on GM here because it was its Investor Day I just watched, and company reps are pretty darn transparent about their intentions to exploit the white space opened up by software and services. But let's be honest, this isn't anything that Tesla, Ford, VAG, or any other automaker can't or isn't already doing. Heck, Kate even made an entire video about Kia pondering doing just the same thing several years ago. Though I should note that Tesla claims not to retain any customer data, there are reasons to be a bit dubious about said claims. The future of car ownership is a complicated one, but as we've already started to see, we likely won't truly own our cars, or at least we'll be leasing some of their capabilities. We don't want this video to get too long, so I'm going to go quick through a few things. There was talk of OnStar Insurance, which is making the company big bucks already, and GM sees not only as a revenue source in itself, but by giving better insurance rates to people who pay for enhanced vehicle safety features, GM can incentivize premium purchases or ongoing subscriptions. The basic model, an insurance program that bases your rates on your driving behavior, isn't new, but GM's Vice President of Innovation, Pam Fletcher, who by the way led the Bolt EV development program, noted that OnStar Insurance tracks far more parameters through the car than cell phone-based programs from some other companies can. And yes, it sounds an awful lot like Tesla's insurance product. GM Defense is building vehicles for the US Army. Those are petrol-powered for now, but it has produced a prototype EV variant as well. It's also developing a new GMC Suburban for the US Department of State. If you're a General Motors investor, I'm sure its defense subsidiary is interesting, but it's not terribly relevant right now for us. BrightDrop, the electric delivery vehicle brand GM developed, is definitely more relevant, and we'll cover it in a detailed video at some point soon. In brief though, it's worth noting that the company produces everything from electric delivery vehicles to electric containers, with everything connected through IoT into what GM describes as a delivery ecosystem, all providing delivery and last mile solutions without emissions. The company plans to massively scale up manufacturing, so it'll be interesting to see where the next few years lead. I'm withholding judgment as if it will be successful or not. GM execs went to great pains to tell us that it has a startup mindset and that the first BrightDrop vehicles enter production incredibly rapidly. Then we get to GM Super Cruise, the newly announced GM Ultra Cruise, and just plain Cruise, a continuation of General Motors' absolutely bonkers and incomprehensible naming conventions. Super Cruise is GM's highway-based, hands-free driving assistance system. It's good, but limited in terms of where it can be used, being unavailable even on many highways and all smaller roads. The newly announced Ultra Cruise is far more comprehensive, with GM saying it will cover 95% of places a driver might go, as long as we're talking about paved roads. In a stark contrast to Tesla and its camera-based Tesla Vision system, GM Ultra Cruise uses a suite of different sensors, including cameras, LiDAR, and radar. While Tesla Autopilot and Full Self-Driving Beta require one to keep their hands on the wheel, Super Cruise and Ultra Cruise do not, though they do require drivers to keep their attention on the road ahead. Cruise is a very different beast, being GM's fully autonomous vehicle program, which is nearing regulatory approval to take paying customers. The program currently accepts passengers but not payment, and to carry those customers without a safety driver, at least in San Francisco. While at the moment Cruise is using modified Chevy Bolt EVs, at the end of next year production will begin on the Cruise Origin, a dedicated autonomous electric ride-sharing pod, built of course on an Ultium platform. We were told on Investor Day that the autonomous software would be ready by then, though to paraphrase the presentation, quote, it has to be ready because the Origin production date is already set. I found that a bit less than reassuring personally, especially for a company that hasn't shown the best results when rushed, but I guess we'll see how it goes. Interestingly, while Cruise is seen as a huge potential revenue source and GM is deeply invested in China, the company is looking at developing entirely separate Chinese market autonomous vehicle technology to comply with a very different governmental and regulatory environment, though it's safe to say that lessons learned from Cruise will still be valuable. Since there was a ton of software talk during Investor Day, during the Q&A session we were told that across the whole of General Motors, 25% of employees are software engineers. I suppose that shouldn't be surprising, but it was to me. I could go on and on, it was a massive load of information, but those are the highlights we at the channel thought most worth sharing. What do you think? Is General Motors positioned well for the EV transition? Would you consider a GM EV in the next 5 years? Are you concerned about the implications of highly connected vehicles and subscription services? Do you think it makes sense for GM to keep making combustion crossovers and trucks? And do you think you'll be catching a ride in a GM Cruise autonomous pod in the near future? Let us know what you think in the comments below. That's it for today. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and our other two channels, Transport Evolved Take 2 and Transport Evolved Shorts. We know that while a fair few of you are already subscribed, many more aren't, so go on, hit the bell and help us out. Let us know below what you thought of this video, and remember, play nice. If you're not fond of the YouTube comment section, then why not continue this on our Discord server? It's free and we'll leave the links below. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folk on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patrons. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons, David Janakula, Andrew Martin, Guido Drohoda, Brofy Wolf, Tazan the Gong, Shong Ueda, Gordon C., Regine Fellows, Anonymous Freak, Jim Burness, Kyle Hodson, Anthony Coates, Ricky Long, Brian Newton, Laura Sanborn, Laurie Ritman, and Denny Hyde. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters, John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Grahan, Matthew Drobnak, Christopher Jones, Paul Conway, Ellery Hensley, and Ian. And a special welcome to all our new Patreons. Thank you so much for joining us this past week. If you'd like to join the ranks of our wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin, and Ko-fi. And of course, you can also buy your very own tea swag at our Redbubble store. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving.